So look, welcome everybody from me. As Jonathan said, the focus of this session is grading and feature lines 101. So there's no sort of assumption that you know all about feature lines and grading, and we deep dive. I'll try and pull you into shallow waters first. So what I'm going to do is just kick off with a quick description of sort of where grading and feature lines fit in with Civil 3D. And the question you've got to ask yourselves is, well, what's their purpose? Why would you use them? The big thing about feature lines is that it's quite a core component of Civil 3D. Civil 3D actually leverage feature lines for a whole bunch of activities related to essentially a very intelligent 3D polyline. So the feature line behaves like a 3D polyline in AutoCAD, but with a lot more functionality, a lot more power. But essentially, the feature line is a driver for elevation change along some sort of 2D feature. So basically, it's a 3D entity. It allows you to do a whole bunch of stuff. So in and of itself, you use the feature line to build up a terrain. You basically build grade breaks for features like building pads, bottom of retaining walls, top of retaining walls, detention basins, a split somewhere for elevation change. And it really is a great tool for you to work in 2D, but have a sort of separate interface to talk about and describe the 3D design elements. The feature line has some really nice reference tools. You can obtain elevations from somewhere else so that you can design your site thinking about crossfall constraints or elevation constraints. And because it's built into as a breakline to a surface when you add it, it's actually a dynamic reactor, so it's quite malleable in that sense. The feature line is also a base for doing what we call gradings. So the time will come in your design where you'll say, well, really I'd like to just shoot up a certain slope and hit a surface, or I'd like to go out a distance from a design feature, being the feature line. So the feature line acts as a baseline to hold a projection can come off the feature line. It's called a grading. And you might grade out a distance at a slope for, say, a footpath, or you might grade up at a sharp slope for a retaining wall. But the feature line is actually your core base to get to that grading. The other thing feature lines do is they can be linked to a profile, and that gives you the ability to basically use the Civil 3D profile directly as a breakline, and they're also able to be leveraged as a corridor baseline for any of you involved in corridors. So what I'm going to do in this session is to overview the infrastructure that where feature lines and gradings live. Okay, so I need to talk to you about this idea of sites, which is basically the ability to hold, contain, and manage how feature lines and gradings interact. I'll talk to you about how to create them. Very easy. Start with a 2D polyline, create a feature line, and start working in 3D. I'll talk to you about what happens when they overlap each other, and that comes back to sites. I'll talk to you about then how to do gradings. So how do you use a feature line to do a rules-based projection? So, you know, offset, distance at a slope, those sorts of things. And the whole way I'm going to sort of build up some pseudo little design. So I'll just sort of try and keep a little bit contextual at that point. And knowing me, I will squish the time, and there'll be very little time for Q&A, but we will definitely make time for Q&A at the end. And please avail yourselves of using the questions area if you have any questions on the way. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about grading design and the 4 steps in that, and then we'll go in and we'll look at expanding out one of those steps, which is about creating the feature line. So just recapping what a grading is, it's the idea of doing projections where you're doing rules-based push-outs or ins from a feature line, and you want to have some sort of rule for that. So the most obvious one is battering to a surface. To do that, you actually need to go through 4 key steps. And the first thing is to define a site. So Civil 3D has an area called sites, and you can make as many as you like. But when you put feature lines, grading objects, parcels, alignments in a site, they interact with each other. So parcels and alignments interact in that alignments split parcels in two, they divide parcels, and you need your feature lines and your gradings in the same site so that they can link to each other. Okay, so the feature line then drives the grading. And the other thing to know about a site is when you put objects in a site, if they cross over in 2D, in 3D they have to share an elevation. Okay, so if you put feature lines, gradings, and parcels in a site, all 3D capable elements, where they cross over each other, they have to share the same elevation if they're in the same site. That's a positive as long as you know how to use sites to your advantage. Once you've defined a site, we can then go ahead and create feature lines, and this is where you basically take your 2D polylines, put some elevations on them. It supports 3D curves, and it's a base entity for you to then build a surface, do some grading, make some corridors. If you want to go and do grading, you create a grading group, and the idea of the grading group is to basically say how the gradings are going to be used to build a surface in particular. And lastly, you would go ahead and create gradings. So every time you create a grading in Civil 3D, you're essentially building a solid, and that solid is the grading object, and you can see that in 3D. But these are the main components that make up site grading in Civil 3D, and I'll be spending a fair bit of time on the feature lines because you can do a lot with just those. Okay, that's it for the discussion. Let's go and have a real look. So we have in this job here a surface, and I have an outline for a parcel of land that I'm going to design vertically. And I've just, to kick us off, got a polyline here for a building pad. So what I want to do is nice and carefully introduce what feature lines do, how they work vertically, and then how to use them. So what we're going to be doing in this session is building up a site and putting feature lines and gradings in that site. We'll also be building up surfaces by using the feature lines as breaklines. So feature lines live in the Home tab for creation under feature line, and you'll see here that there's 4 areas here that you should focus on for creating feature lines. Not a lot of people use this one, which is create from scratch. Most people start with a polyline, and that's what this command would do. But if you see create feature lines from alignment would allow you to create a feature line that dynamically copies what a profile does. And if you wanted to use feature lines in a corridor, you could attach it to a code of a corridor and then do gradings off it. You can also do a stepped offset from a feature line outwards or inwards, which is quite a nice, neat way to create offset features. And I will cover that up, cover that over, do it. And under grading, you go through this process of creating gradings with these tools. And really, we can do everything from the grading toolbar, which I'll open as we go through. So what I want to do is just play a design here. The plan is that we're going to use this polyline as a limit of works, and we're going to start with a building pad here. We'll probably reorient it on the site. We're going to put a footpath connecting it out to the edge of the property. We might put some sort of balcony or some sort of flat area in front of it, maybe a footpath around it. But to get started, what we're going to do is explore what a feature line is. So we are going to convert this 2D polyline into a feature line. So you run create feature line from objects, and the first thing you need to do is stick the feature line in a site. Okay, you can call it whatever you want, but basically all the feature lines that live in that site can interact with each other when they cross over. You have the opportunity to name a feature line, and it's actually a good idea. So I'm going to go building pad 1. And you also have a style, and as you would know from previous sessions, every object in Civil 3D has its display and some of its behavior managed via a style. And the style in a feature line sort of describes some markers for looking at it long section, cross section, and then in plan, the main driver is the color. Okay, so it's almost like drawing a polyline. Now, when you create the feature line, you can delete the polyline, and you can also assign elevations straight away. Forgive the change in terminology. I will see the word level. You will probably see the word elevation. I'm running the UK country version, so some of the terminology is slightly different. But I click OK, and I'm able to immediately assign an elevation to this object, and I can actually drape it onto a surface, and that would take all the physical 2D geometry points and put them on the natural surface. If I tick this box, then in between the 2D points, it will add 3D points to exactly describe the terrain. Every lift, lower, every ridge and valley along that terrain would get added as an elevation point if I tick this box. And this is actually very cool, and I'll do that around the perimeter, where you basically say, I don't want to specify physical elevations, I want to have a level difference. That's what this option does. For now, I'm just going to pick level. I'm going to type in 42 just to kick off. And I now have what's called a feature line. Now, what does it really mean? It looks the same. You know, what does it do different? As soon as I click on it, and I'm a big fan of sort of selection in Civil 3D because you get some really good feedback about what an object can do. You'll see the ribbon, contextual ribbon turns up for this feature line. And it basically says in here, hey, you've got the ability to use these tools to edit the geometry. Okay, so if I want to trim or extend, if I want to add an extra bend in this building pad somewhere, then I can use this tool to do it. Okay, so basically I can hit up the geometry in plan. On the next side of the edits, I can also edit it vertically. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to this thing called the elevation editor. And this is a little panel that turns up, and it allows me to see what the elevations are all the way around this object. Okay, so if I deselect the object, you'll see that it highlights the corners. If I click on one of these corners, it will actually show me where I am around this feature. Okay, and as I walk around, I can actually edit the elevation, edit the grade from this point forward, edit the grade from that point back. Okay, so this spreadsheet essentially allows me to manipulate this design. So let's say I start at the start here and I'd like to keep this flat, so I'm not going to change the elevation. When I get to the second point, maybe from here I'd like to go down at 1% to get to that point. So if I put in here -1 in grade forward, not grade back, then I'm going to change the elevation from this point to the next point. And you'll see that now this is 41.857. If I set the grade to be 0, oops, don't want to go back, I want to go forward. If I set the grade to be 0, I set the grade from there to there is 0. I'll set that at, well, let's change this back. I must have done grade behind. There we go, I did. I'm going to set the grade from here forward at 0. I'm going to set the grade from the next point to the back at 1. And then from along this back line here, I'll set this at 0. So basically, you have the ability to write out elevations along here. A little bit hard to appreciate potentially just looking at the numbers. So what I'll do is I'll just split this view in two. And I might need to clean up some things, but I'm going to run this in 3D so we can see it. Okay, let me just hide this away. Okay, so this thing is sitting out here in 3D, right? And yeah, there's not a lot of context around it. If I do something dramatic, if I make this say 20, you will see that it's definitely a 3D entity, right? So we are pummeling it vertically as we make these changes. One other thing to know just about a feature line, because it's 3D, you're certainly encouraged to click on the feature line. And if you have a look up in the ribbon or you right click, there's a thing called Quick Profile. And Quick Profile is going to let you quickly have a look at this feature line in context of other surfaces. Okay, so I'll just dump that down here. Okay, so we can sort of track the elevations of this feature line quickly using this quick profile. And again, if I go back to the elevation editor, if I put something dramatic in here like minus 10%, I can see it happen there, and I can see it certainly in 3D. The other things you can do with this, I mean, if you thought this building pad was a bit high, just by looking at this, you might want to raise and lower it. So you can highlight cells in here, and there's a raise lower tool. Okay, so I could just hit the down arrow here, and I drop the whole thing by 1/2 meter, right? And I could just keep doing that and keep raising and lowering all of them, or I could actually be quite selective and raise or lower just a few. Okay, so this editor can do more than what I've shown, but just as a quick show there, you can see how it is that you can make edits and manipulate vertically. If you don't know where you are, I don't know why the markers aren't there right now, but if I can zoom to one, oh, there we go, because the active drawing is not that one. Yes, that's giving action to that. But I can basically zoom wherever I want to whichever IP just by using this zoom to button. Okay, so this is one way to edit your building pad. If I want to flatten the whole thing out, I can highlight, and you've got a flatten tool here. So I'm going to flatten the whole lot for a constant level, and it's going to adopt whichever one was the first one I selected in the list. If you feel the need to have vertical change along a line, well, that can be done as well. If you click on this button here, which is elevation point, you can say, well, I want to put an elevation lift at this location. And I can give it a different elevation. And if I just make this 3D again, we'll sort of be able to see I'm making the wrong one 3D. If I make this view here 3D, we can track there that there's a ridge happening in here. Okay, I think the reason you're seeing this other line is because of the quick profile. So because the quick profile is making basically a profile around that edge, that's the existing ground you're looking at there. Okay, so with that elevation point, it's actually defined quite nicely in the panorama. And if you actually click on your feature line, you'll see that you get square grips, which handle the 2D, and circle grips, which are purely 3D controls. And you can move those anywhere you want along the feature. But what it does, it gives you an opportunity to put an elevation kink in the system without having to work over a horizontal geometry control. So what you'll see is when I move this feature line, I'm moving that vertical point will move with it. Okay. All right. So it's a little bit about sort of how a feature line hangs together. What I'm going to do now is to sort of show you how to use that in the context of other feature lines and going ahead and building a surface. So in an effort to, I guess, get some physicality into this feature, what I'm going to do is create a second feature line. And I'm going to do this one quite differently. This feature line, I really want to simply drape onto the surface because this is how limiter works. Okay, so we're doing a development internal to this property. So if I create a feature line from objects again, I'm going to put in the same site. Why? Because if the building pad touched this feature line for whatever reason, I want them to share a level. Okay, so if I want them to overlap each other vertically, I have to separate the sites. Okay, so I'd make a new site. I'm going to call this one limit of works. And I'm leaving it as a primary feature line. We'll talk about the importance of the style later beyond just its visual impact. I'm going to go assign levels, and if you track what I'm doing here, I'm going to say, let's attach this to the natural surface, and let's set it so its relative elevation change to natural surface is 0. So once I do this, I then create a feature line, but you'll see that this feature line has, oh, I did that wrong. Let me undo it, and I'll do it again, because there was one other thing I wanted to show you. When I assign this, I wanted to set the elevations, but I also want to insert intermediate grade breakpoints to capture the ridges and the valleys around the perimeter. So now, having done that, when I look at this, you'll see the difference. There's a whole bunch of elevation points at these locations. These elevation points tie back to the triangulation of the natural surface. You can see in 3D here that we now have this object sort of pushing around highs and lows, high up this end and low down the other. If I open this in the elevation editor, you'll notice something quite different in terms of inputs. You'll see up here, I've actually picked, well, I told the software to assign elevations relative to this surface. So what happens is the elevation field gets grayed out, right? But you now have the ability to say, well, I'd like to be, I don't know, a meter above the surface at this location, right? So you can actually say that you'd like to be a distance above or below, okay? So quite a different input. Instead of a fixed elevation, it's the elevation difference. Now, one thing I'll just let you know, if you wanted to ease out that 1 meter height change over a distance, you can do that in two ways. You can actually do it using this command here in the edits, or straight from this panorama window, the elevation editor. If I hit this button, flatten grade, then I can actually say constant grade from that point to that point, so over a distance of 40 meters. And what will happen is the elevation difference will be all over the shot, but if you look at the grade, I now have a constant grade over those IPs. Okay, so you've got a lot of capacity here to make change. There's quite a few ways to do edits. I just restored it all to be draped back on the surface. So how do we make use of these? So we've got these two things. We can label them. That's all cool. But I want to use them for volume information. So what I'm going to do is to make a surface. So I'm going to call this one new site. I'm going to leave it with 1 meter contours. And if I expand out the definition, I can add them as breaklines. Now, if you're a right-click person, just realize that you can grab these feature lines, right-click, and there's an Add to Surface as Breaklines tool here, get you to exactly the same spot. So I'm going to do some features. And in here, I like to put a supplementing distance on so that triangulation is fairly regular, but that's completely at your discretion. But once I click OK, what happens is that information gets bound in to build a surface, right? So we're now looking at surface triangulation in here as well as those feature lines. And of course, it is dynamic if the surface is allowed to be dynamic. Let me just hide this. So any change you make to this feature line is automatically updating your surface. Okay, you can put on some slope arrows here to assess what sort of slopes you have. And if you want some information here about how steep things are, this is quite a good tool to have a bit of a look at. But as I move the feature line around, if I hold down Shift, I can grab two groups at once, move them as a collective. But basically, as you ooze that shape out, you're changing the terrain underneath. Okay. If I wanted to raise or lower this, I can open up the elevation editor and do that. But if you have a look at these little sets of tools here, I'll take note of a few. One is this one, raise lower. So I can just pick this, I can put half a meter elevation change on it, it raises it up, and you'll see the terrain updates to reflect that. If I was keen on making sure that this corner here had a slope relative to the feature line at this location, you can also do that using the feature line edit tools. So if I just take a moment here to have a look at some of these feature line edit tools, this one would insert a high point elevation along a segment. This one here will raise lower by reference or set level by reference. This will flatten the grade between 2 points around a feature line. This will drape a corner onto a surface or a whole feature line onto a surface. If I click on reference here, what you can do is say, well, I'm interested in referencing this point, which has an elevation of 38.542, and I know that because I looked at the coordinate here, but I can then use that level to assign a level anywhere on this other feature line. So if I pick this point, it says here, well, what would you like? You want to get that level and then add some more. What do you want to do? I want to do it based on a grade. And I want the grade to be no worse than 3%. What that's done is actually set the level at that corner. Okay. Now, if I have a look at this building pad, you remember I used elevation level editor to set levels. Another way I could actually do this is by using what's called the quick elevation edit. Now, if you follow what this does, when you run this command, you just hover on a segment. See the arrow? If I click now and I type 0, I've just set a 0 grade from this point to the next. So you can actually use this to just click on points, set levels, drape onto surface, and you can also just hover on the lines, type in the grades you want, and you'll see that I'm writing those grades out into the elevation editor. Right, so all I'm doing here is a quick flatten. Right, I'm just walking around this object and flattening it just by clicking on each segment and setting the grade to be 0. Okay, so you've got a number of ways to edit a feature line, and obviously terrain updates as we go. I might get rid of this quick elevation by just saving. Okay. All right, so I've got a building pad. What I want to do with that, I want to create an offset for a path, footpath around that. I can actually use grading to do that, but I want to play a bit more in feature lines. There's a command here called stepped offset, which you also saw from the Home tab. Now what stepped offset does, it's simple to use, and that's what's good about it. You click on stepped offset, and you type in an offset. So I want a 1.5 meter footpath around this building. So I type 1.5 for the offset distance. I pick the side, so I'm going to grade to the outside. And then I get to choose the elevation that happens on that basis. And I can do it with an elevation difference, a gradient, a slope, a fixed level, or variable crossfalls. I'm going to do it based on a gradient, and I want a positive gradient of 2.5%. or negative gradient, minus 2.5%. So what you'll see in the plan here is in 3D, you can see that's gone in and it's actually dropped down by minus 2.5%. Now these two feature lines don't actually 100% relate to each other. They're actually independent pieces. So we can independently move, let's say this building pad, I'm going to use the raise, I'm going to raise it by an extra 0.5 meter. What you'll see is that we definitely don't have a 2.5% difference here now to the footpath. So how do we, make that work? How do we get this feature line to reference? Well, we could use that single set elevation by reference, but this one here, adjacent levels by reference, will actually do the whole thing at once. So if we pick on the inside, elevation by reference, that becomes the reference, and then I select my outside footpath, and I say I want that minus 2.5% back, and it will raise the other feature line up. So you can see that raise there in 3D. I'm going to add that as a break line. So I'll use the other method here, add to surface as break line. I'm going to add it to new site, and I've now got it in as a break line. Okay, so I've got a sort of dedicated footpath control happening here. And obviously wherever I move those two to, it's going to hang along and do its thing. Okay, I want to show you about crossing feature lines. I'll come back and add more to this based on the time that we have. But what I'm going to do is to create a connection, okay, between the limit of works and this building pad. And I'm going to do that by just drawing initially just a polyline. Okay, hook it in like that. And I'm going to turn this into a feature line. So the first thing to appreciate is that this polyline touches the other two feature lines. Okay, that's quite important to know. But what I'm going to do is to make this into a feature line, and when I pick on it, initially what it will do is it'll use the elevations of those two feature lines. So I'm going to say this is a footpath, and I'm leaving it as a primary feature line. I'll come back and talk to you about why that's not necessarily a great idea. But once I click OK, that feature line goes in, and I can see it here. Now, what's it done? It's actually edited one of the other feature lines, okay, where it's connected. So vertically, you can see it's pulled up that footpath, that edge of that building line, right? You see that lift there in 3D. So why has it done that? It's done that because they have to share an elevation, and by virtue of the style, they're actually considered to be the same thing, right? So they've got the same power to override each other. How do I fix that? Well, if I have a look at this feature line and go level editor, you'll actually see a marker here, and it's showing you that there's something hitting that setting a level. You do have the ability to override that and take a bit of control back. You can either have a go at changing the levels around this thing, but certainly from in terms of connection, the last one you move is the last one that wins. So if I move this, you'll see that something very different happens in 3D. You'll see that the footpath dags out. The bit that dags out is big lift. So there's a big lift in this last little segment here. But the part where it touches this new moved footpath edge, it's matching the elevation because it has to, right? So if I just pull that back and touch the edge, you'll see that it then goes and matches. But the last one you edit wins, okay? So the last feature line you edit wins if they're the same style. So I want to show you what happens if they're not the same style. If I click on this feature line, I right click and I go into its properties, which is, I'll go on blind for a moment, edit feature line properties. If I change this to, let's say, a secondary feature line, what that means is that if I move this to somewhere else, if I change its elevation, it's actually always going to be subservient to the footpath, okay, the main building footpath feature line. So if I look at this in the elevation editor, what you'll see is that it actually flags that you've connected, but you'll see that the elevation is grayed out, okay, because this is doing whatever the other feature lines tell it to do. Now, I want to show you the secret of how that happens. And to do that, I'm going to take you into the location where all these feature lines live. So when we created all these feature lines, we put them in a site, and you'll see when you click on the word feature lines that all those feature line objects are in here. Okay, and I can right click and select them so you can see which ones we're talking about. So I'm going to name this outside building footpath. Now you'll see that this one's secondary, and what that means is that it's not winning the elevation battle. Now, why? If we right click on the site and we have a look at the properties, no, wrong location, sorry. If we right click on the feature lines and have a look at properties, you'll see in here that there's the statistics and the group statistics, but under options, it actually says which feature lines win the elevation battle, and it's based on the feature line style. And you'll see the secondary feature line is below the primary. So if the two cross, the primary feature line elevations are unchanged and the secondary feature line is adjusted. Okay, so if you want something that always connects vertically to something else, make sure it's second or third in the list. Okay, so below the other feature line. I hope I've explained that okay. But basically, they have to share an elevation. You choose which one wins. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to offset this because I think this is cool for a footpath. I'm going to do 1.5 meters and I'll offset to this side, and I'll do the 2.5%. Okay, so I've now got another feature line, and when I click on it, if I look at the elevation editor, you'll see that it's stuck here on the red, and it's stuck here on the red. So what I'm going to do is use the feature line trim tool to trim that up. Okay, so I'm just going to trim that end. Oh, the cutting edges. Okay, just like a traditional trim. I'll grab these two cutting edges. I'm going to trim this end, and I'm going to trim this end. Okay, so I've now got a footpath, and whatever I do to the building pad levels will automatically reflect on that footpath. Okay, so we look in 3D here. I'll sort of try and flatten it out, focus on that footpath. I'm going to lift the building pad, these two feature lines up by 1/2 meter. So I highlight the two of them. I right click, raise lower, and do 0.5 meters. If you have a look in 3D what happens, you should expect that the footpath will lift up to match. Okay, I'm going to add those as break lines to the surface. Call it footpath. And I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to select these two guys. And we're now driving that footpath. Now I want the footpath to have a single grade, so I probably need to address these separately now. So I'm just going to highlight these two, and I'm going to say flatten the grade. Flatten the grade. Okay, so that's flattened. I'll do the same on the outside. I probably should do the reference elevation, but I'll do this instead. Here to here, I'm going to flatten the grade. Okay, so I've got this footpath, it's connected. What I'm going to do with it is have a bit of play with it. So what I am going to do is show you some physical 2D geometry, so a fillet tool. So I'm going to put in a 5 meter radius and fillet this. Then what I'm going to do is run the fillet command again. So I'll select this object and I'll change the radius to 6.5. Okay, so the cool thing is that if I look at this in 3D, sorry, not in 3D, in the elevation editor, you'll see that I've now got a 3D arc happening. Okay, so it's driving through that arc. So that's a little bit about sort of feature lines and how they go together. If you put them in the same site, they'll share an elevation. Okay, if you don't want them to share an elevation, separate the sites. What I'll do just quickly, just to force the point about elevations, is I'm going to create a flat area off here. It's going to be like some sort of walkout area. So I'll just turn this into a feature line. And I'll call this deck. I won't assign elevations. I'm going to make it a secondary feature line because I don't want it to dominate the elevations at all. So I'm going to change it to a secondary feature line. I'll do that from the AutoCAD properties. I'll make it secondary. And then I know that it's not going to dominate the footpath levels, right? Now, if we have a look vertically, where does that hang out? I'll just spin this around a bit. You can sort of see it there. You see that green line there. Okay, what I'm going to do with that is quickly use a quick elevation edit on it. And I'm just going to shoot out this direction. And I'm going to say, let's go out at -0.5%. And across the here, we're going to make it dead flat. Okay, so very slight tilt on it. I add it as a break line. And I've now got sort of a raised deck in place, right? If I wanted to sort of show that as an abrupt change, a real easy, simple way to do it is draw a polyline just outside here. And I drape this onto the surface, right? So I'll just go and quickly do that, and then we'll move on to grading. So I'm going to turn that into a feature line. And I'm going to say base level, bad term here. And I'll make it a secondary. But in here, I just go natural surface, intermediate, relative to surface, 0, and you'll see that then the feature line draping down on the existing ground. Okay, What I'm going to do with that, I'm going to add it as a breakline. Okay, so what I've got now is a nice stepped up area. Okay, let's talk about grading, and then we'll sort of round trip back to feature lines. So the idea of a grading is to preserve rules. So if you think about this building pad and its relationships, all of it I sort of managed, where I said, oh, I want to set relative elevation at this point and then do my own thing. If you have something that's sort of a structured rules-based shape, a curb, a retaining wall, detention basin, then you can use grading to automate the connection. So rather than using stepped offset, you can basically say, hey, do a rule from here to here with these slope behaviors or height difference behaviors. So what I'm going to do here is just draw some sort of detention basin here as an example. I can put bends in it however I want. And I'm going to make a grading out of this. So I'm going to take feature lines and then push it to the next level. So I'm going to create feature line from this base. Now I'm going to leave it in the same site because I want to show you the implication of touching feature lines to gradings to other feature lines, and then time permitting feature lines to feature lines. Sorry, gradings to gradings. So I'm going to call this one basin bottom. I'll leave it as primary. I won't give it a level yet. What is the level in here? 30. New site 30. All right, cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just go into the elevation editor, highlight all these, and I will go with 30. So I can actually see it in 3D here. Could probably be a little bit higher. There we go. All right, so we're going to do a grading off this. Now, I definitely want a flat bottom, but maybe I want something interesting to happen internally. I might show you an example of that in a moment. But let's talk about grading. So how does grading work? Start with a feature line, and you run up the grading tools. So what a grading does is it basically runs a projection. As I said, it'll create a feature line at its end, from which you can then do more gradings. But the grading itself is a solid. To do a grading, you need to define a grading group, and you can do it here. You can do it from the menu. This is the Creation Grading Tools toolbar. Very useful interface for you to do gradings. But the first thing you need to do is define a grading group. You ask yourself why, but there's a couple of reasons. Main one is that you name this, and you get to decide if the gradings you create get used to build a surface. That's the biggest thing about creating a grading group is the building the terrain. And I'm going to get the software to automatically build that. I will give it this style. There's a tessellation, spacing, and angle. This is about how the break lines get added to the surface. I'll also get volumes against, say, new site, right? Not against natural. I'm going to do it against this graded pad. Oh, no, I'll do it against natural. Once I click OK, I then get to define that building. Sorry, to confirm the surface. You'll see a surface is built over here. If you actually look inside this, if you want to know how it's going to do its thing, it actually has a tick box that says I'm going to include the grading group. That's the reason why it builds a surface as you make gradings. Okay, we want to do a basin. At the moment, I've got the bottom of the basin, which you can see here. What I want to do is step up and put a big lip on this. So what I want to do is go a height above the bottom and at a certain slope. So if I look at my grading options, these are all the different ways to do a grading. Okay, you can make your own styles for these. I'll show you one, but if you use a good template, they'll already be here. It says here, if you use this criteria, you go out a distance, user defined, based on a slope, user defined. Okay, so this one is offset by slope. You go out a distance, specifying a slope. They're very easy to make. When the corners happen, when it has to do internal corners, it's going to use the average slope to work out the elevation to use, okay, because where they have to come together. Okay, so I'm going to use offset by, no, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use height difference by slope, right? So this one says the input is a relative level and you're doing it based on a slope. So we go create grading. I'm going to go and click on this feature. I'm going to grade to the outside. I'll do the same thing all the way around. And in the command line, it's now saying, well, how high do you want to go? I want to go 3 meters up. What's the slope? 1 in 2. Once I press enter to this, the software will then create that shape. Okay, so what you're seeing on the right here is that shape. That is a grading object. You'll see those slope patterns. That's a grading object. Okay, so it's now built that shape. The cool thing is with a grading object is that it understands that it's coming off that feature line baseline. So if you move your feature line baseline around, expect the terrain to automatically update because all the grading to update, which then drives the terrain. Okay, the cool thing about a grading group is that I can then go, all right, I want to put a 1.5 meter top on this that's nice and flat. So I'm going to go offset by grade. I click on this feature line, okay, which is the calculated feature line from grading. And it says, do you want to do the same thing all the way around? Okay, I will. I'm going to go out 1.5 meters and I'm going to do it at 2%. And you'll now see in 3D that top's gone on and it's actually built the surface out there as well. Now what I'm going to do is put the batter around this thing, okay? But I'm going to do it and show you a little bit of an extra technique in grading. So I want to grade to the surface. So there's actually a criteria already here, surface by slope. You'll see cut first and fill first. It's a subtle thing, but what happens if I pick cut first, the software will check for a cut solution first, and if that fails, then do a fill solution. So cut looks up, fill looks down. Okay, doesn't matter which way you go with this because there's only really one answer, which is going to be fill or cut. So what I'm going to do is do a grading. So I click on the outside edge of this feature, apply to entire length. I'm going to say no. The reason I'm saying no is because basically what I want is from here to here, I want to do a different slope. So I'm going to say I want to do a 1 in 3 slope. Okay, so you'll see that is now a new grading object and it pokes out a little bit. There'll be a bit of conflict here. There'll be a fight on elevations. Now, if I click on the feature line again, it's actually asking me to pick a start point and an end point. So I'm basically going to have a different grade running around the back. So I'm going to go from here to here. And over that distance, I'm going to set the slope to be 1 in 1. Okay, so what the software's done is it's provided a steeper slope over part and a bigger slope over the other. Now, how do you join the gap together? Because you do need to leave a gap. There's 2 ways. You could draw a feature line in here and create create an infill grading, which we'll talk about in a moment. But there is a special tool called a transition grading. Now, it only works if the grading types are the same. So the fact that these both grade to surface is going to make it work. But all I do is I click in the gap and then it transitions something in between. Okay, so I pick the feature and the gap and it transitions something in between. So once I press enter to this or escape to finish it, it will then blend the result for me. Okay. So this is a grading object made up of multiple items. If I actually click on that surface there and I go into Object Viewer, you'll see a problem. Okay, you'll see that, yeah, it's built. You can see it's transitioning there from flatter slopes to steeper slopes, but there's nothing in the middle. So when you do grading, what's happening is it's automatically putting a hide boundary internally. To get rid of that, you add what's called an infill. Okay, and once you do it, you get a little diamond here. So there's not a lot to tell you what's going on, but there is now a surface happening internally, right? So now if you calculate earthworks, it's going to be all good. So the thing about grading is you've got these rules, they'll create solids, and the grading group will also drive you a surface, okay? Now, we're pretty close to beer and Skittles time, but what I'll do is show you a technique for putting feature lines on top of other feature lines or using one surface to build another. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just combine these surfaces together and turn off the display of the others. So I'm just going to go here and edit the style, say no display. Okay, so I don't really need to do this yet, but what I'm going to do is paste these surfaces together. And for final, I'm just going to come in here to edits, and I'm going to go paste, and I'm going to paste natural surface. No, I won't bother with natural surface. I'll go new site, and then I'm going to paste on top of that the basin. Okay, and that will remain dynamic, and you'll see sort of one surface in here now in 3D. If I do my good old trick here of drawing a polyline and doing a quick profile, and we'll show the final and natural. If I go and drop that somewhere, sort of see what we've got here. We come down, there's a footpath, there's the building. We have a drop down for the natural, and we come up into this this basin. Okay. Now, what I want to do is show you how you could go and put something on top of something else. Okay, so these become sort of a base footprint for you to do other things. I want to stick a weir in this basin. So let's have a think about how we might do that. I'm going to start by drawing a polyline. And what I'm going to do with this polyline is I'm going to tap it onto the top of the wall here. But then I'm going to come out and along inside the wall. Okay, so if we think about this, this is the outside edge of an overtopping area, right, spillway. And what I'm also going to do is draw two lines here, because what I want is basically a break line running from south to north, okay, across the wall to the other side. So bear with me here. Let's do it. What we're going to do is we're going to create a feature line here. We're going to drape it onto the wall. So you'll actually see this will glue onto the wall. And then we're going to create a feature line secondary that will just go straight across. Now, this feature line in particular is not going to use the levels of the other feature lines. I need to put it in a new site. Okay, so what I'm going to do, go up to feature line, I'm going to create this outside edge here. But basically, I'm going to put this in a brand new site. Okay, I'm going to call it spillway. I'm going to assign levels to it, and I'm going to drape it onto the basin surface. I'm going to insert intermediate grade breaks and relative elevation 0. Once I click OK, if you have a look in 3D, we now have this feature touching the wall both sides. Okay, you can sort of see that as we move around there. What we're going to do now is we're going to create two new feature lines, and I'm going to create feature lines out of these two at once. And I'm making them, I'm going to call these ones spillway control, and I'm making them secondary items. Why? Because I want them just to adopt the levels at either end from the red feature line. I don't even need to assign levels. Once I click OK, unique name. Okay, let's add a unique name. Sorry about that. I'll insert next counter. So they have to be unique names. But what you'll see when we look at these features, when I click on them, if you have a look in 3D, you see those green lines. If I just sort of spin this around a bit, they're actually tapping onto the red. Now I can see here I've got a problem where this doesn't, because I didn't get my snaps right. So let me just fix up my snaps. Really lazy. You can see I don't use CAD enough. But I'm snapped at the other ends. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this is build a surface out of it. Let's go and create surface. I'll call this one spillway. Yep, whatever the style's fine. and I'm going to add those break lines. So I'm going to add as break lines to spillway. I click on OK, and there's now a new surface here. Now, you can't appreciate it very well in 3D, but what I'm going to do is paste it into the big master surface, right? So if I just come down to Final, right-click on Edits, I choose Paste. I'm going to paste in the spillway, and what you'll see now is that we now have a surface with the spillway in it. Now, the gradings are sort of in my way here, so I'm just going to turn those off. Just going to hide those away. You can see there that spillway. If I click on this and I show it you in Object Viewer, you'll now see that there's a spillway sitting here. I'll just go shaded with edges. So hopefully you can appreciate that spillway. Now the cool thing about this is all I need to do is move the spillway around and I'll change how it cuts into that surface, because the outside feature line is draped onto the basin, and these two feature lines, as long as they touch the outer one, will adopt the levels. But I've now got a final graded result. What I could do is get you volumes and whatever else you wanted out of that using volumes dashboard. One of the things I didn't note, and I'll just note it now, I won't do it, but if you get to your grading object and you go into the grading group properties, so I'll just go grading creation tools. If you find your grading group, right, which is basin here, if you go to this button, all the buttons change the way they look. This one here, grading volume tools, it will actually tell you the earthworks of just the basin using the gradings, and you can move the whole basin up and down. Okay, I won't do that right now, but if you did, that would change, and there is a balance button here to auto balance. All right, so I've hit the time, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for coming on the journey.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shane. We have had a couple of questions which I couldn't really answer necessarily within the session.
Mm-hmm.
One of which you sort of, well, you kind of mentioned in respect to volumes. The question was actually in relation to a water, a volume of water based on a level against the basin.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk through that loosely, because I appreciate that there's a bit of a process to achieve that. But Tom's asked that question. I thought it'd be a good one to address around now.
Yep. So there's a few ways to do it. I'll talk to you about two of them and do one of them. So there's a few ways to do it. So one is you could extract a contour out of here, build a surface, compare the two. The second is there's a command called datum volume, datum report. What's it called? There's a command line entry, which I have to try and remember, that basically will let you pick an area, specify the water level, and then it will just tell you the volume. The other way to go, there's two other ways to go, so there's many ways to skin this cat. Another way to go is you click on a surface and you run stage storage tool. Okay, so what that does is you extract the contours, and then from those contours you generate a stage storage curve. Okay, so that's probably a pretty cool way to go. The last way, which is the way I'm going to show, is to actually make another grading. Okay, so I'll just quickly do that now. What I'm doing is just moving this up here into the wall more. So basically I've got a level going on here. Why did I do that as a drape? Let me just weed this. It's going to quickly weed out everything based on gradients. That's not going to be what I want. I'll just leave it as is for now. So basically what you can do is you can actually use grading. Okay, so I'm going to draw in here a feature. I will turn into a feature line. Actually, I'll pre-fill it. I'll turn it into a feature line, and all I do is I set the level that I want to look at. So I know there's a bit of weirdness going on here, but let's find a level here. 33. Okay. So I'm going to create feature line out of this. I'm going to put it in its own site. So I'm going to call it water. So this is a slower way to do it, but you'll get a 3D surface. Okay, so the one that's just a type in for the datum is the quickest. What did I say I wanted for elevation? Did I say 33? I think I said 33. Okay, so once I've got this, did I put it in its own site? I did. I'm going to do grading for it. I'm going to call it water. I pick the water site. I'm going to make a new grading group, water. And I'll just show triangulation here. And if I pick volumes against the basin, that's the key, right? So when I make this, I'm going to batter to the basin and I'm going to get volumes to the basin. So when I do a grading, what I do is I click on this feature, go to the outside, and I do it with, whoops, sorry, I'll go back to that. I do it with a battered by slope, all right? And I'm going to do fill first so that it goes slightly down, but you won't notice it, right? Because I'm going to set the slope to be 1:1000. And you'll see that it actually goes out and punches the wall of the basin, right? So any change you make to the basin, it's going to keep punching to the basin wall. And when I create the infill, now I've got water, right? And all I do is I go to the volume button and it tells me how much water I'm storing, okay? Now, if I lower this by 200 mil, you'll see that it will walk down the wall and you'll see that that volume information will change. So essentially I'm cheating to build a stage storage curve, okay? But what I could do is set the ultimate level I want for the water, and then all I do is I grab the basin here, the actual feature line of the basin, and I drag this around to see what I can get in terms of better water results. So something odd's happening here, but did I do it to the wrong side? I'll just grab this feature line and put it back out here. I might have set something stupid on a level here, but basically that's the technique.
Yeah. Thanks, Shane. Just one last question, which Tristan's popped in, which was, are there any sort of helpful tips in regards to potential bugs, I guess, or grading errors that occur within the software? I suppose inherently in the past, gradings had different issues, but is there anything that can assist with the little bugs as we're looking at something right this second? I thought it was a prime question.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's some gradings never meet, right? And that sort of causes Autodesk a bit of grief, having a bit of a think about how things might meet. If a grading is being silly, then you can just delete the grading. Look, typically it's a lot better than it ever used to be. I don't have it crashing like it used to in old versions, but certainly sometimes the results don't appear to make a lot of sense to the user. What you want to do is maybe take out some IPs. Normally there's too many, like if I have a look at this, normally you've got too much of a cluster of these with not enough elevation change, or because there's a big elevation change, there's no result when you project out. So sometimes just tidying up these and weeding them out a bit, it actually solves most of your problems. In my case, I think the problem is I went too low. So I think I went underneath the water at this end, because this isn't a flat bottom. So I don't know if the grading was actually a problem so much as my elevation here. So I think what I need to do with this is actually raise it up. I'd say that that corner is lower than the bottom of the basin. Was it 32.4 versus 32.1? Yeah, should be right. So what I would do is probably review the geometry a little bit, get rid of this curve, raise a little bit. I might just raise it by 0.5 meter, and then I'll try this grading again. So look, sorry, nothing 100% definitive on the best way to fix all issues. It really does depend on what's actually happening to what you try, but normally weeding the feature is the answer.
So the last webcast of the month will be Stringer A-Spec. So have a look out for the newsletter, which will go out next Wednesday, as per usual, which will allow you to obviously subscribe. If you do want to subscribe generally to our live webcast newsletters, you can do so via this link here. Any feedback that you have in regards to future webcasts or the webcasts that you've seen today, feel free to come and pop us any comments you want in here. Thanks ever so much for that, Shane. Enjoy your day off tomorrow and the rest of you Victorians. And yeah, we look forward to seeing as many as we can next week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.